They say a white coat can hide the darkest of secrets, but how deep does the deception run when the person leading an entire hospital is living a lie? She trusted his expertise. They respected his authority. But the man they called Doctor had never set foot in medical school. One discovery, one locked lab, one desperate act that turned a prestigious hospital into a house of horrors. She thought she was working for a medical pioneer. She thought she was helping save lives, but the man they all answered to was hiding something no medical professional should ever discover. And when they did, he made sure their silence was secured, with a death sentence flowing through their veins. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Was it ambition, or was it just a masterclass in manipulation? Stay with me, because what happened next will leave you questioning everyone in a white coat. Who was Dr. Marcus Whitley? His name wasn't printed in medical journals or honored at prestigious award ceremonies like he claimed, but within the halls of Riverside Memorial Hospital in Portland, his title carried a weight that commanded instant respect. Dr. Whitley wasn't just employed, he was revered. Marcus built his reputation by calculated diagnosis, fabricated research papers, forged recommendations, and a network of international medical breakthroughs that were as impressive as they were completely fictional. His position as hospital director didn't come from years of dedicated study, but from years of dedicated deception. His colleagues didn't just admire him, they aspired to be him. And anyone who questioned his methods found themselves transferred, demoted, or pushed into resignation. His name was whispered in conference rooms, his treatments were studied by actual doctors, and his authority had no boundaries within those hospital walls. But Marcus was also a man who understood optics. He wore perfectly pressed lab coats, displayed framed diplomas from institutions he'd never attended, and his public persona painted him as a selfless healer dedicated to advancing medicine. To the medical community, he was the gold standard of excellence. To those who eventually discovered the truth, he was the embodiment of betrayal. And then there was Dr. Emily Chen, the woman who would become his downfall. She wasn't naive or inexperienced. In fact, she was the opposite. Brilliant, methodical, and recently appointed as the hospital's chief of surgery. She grew up in a world where excellence wasn't just expected but demanded, where every achievement was simply a stepping stone to the next challenge. She had earned everything in her life through legitimate hard work, something Marcus Whitley would never understand. They met during her hospital orientation, where he personally welcomed her to what he called the Riverside family. She wasn't starstruck like many others. She was professional, focused on the opportunity to lead a prestigious surgical department. That's where Marcus noticed her for the first time. She wasn't easily impressed, wasn't seeking validation, but her surgical reputation was impossible to ignore. He kept her close, with the wariness of a man who recognized a potential threat. For Emily, it wasn't suspicion at first sight. It wasn't even suspicion at all. She respected him as her superior, appreciated the resources he funneled to her department, and never questioned his credentials. She didn't care about hospital politics and rarely attended administrative functions. For her, excellence in the operating room was all that mattered. Her distance from hospital gossip wasn't just professional preference, it was her character. Dr. Whitley made it clear from the beginning that he wasn't like other hospital administrators. He gave the surgical department everything they needed, state-of-the-art, equipment, additional staff, priority scheduling. But there was one condition, one area that remained strictly off-limits: basement level B, his private research laboratory. The restriction was simple: access every resource available, pursue any treatment protocol you believe in, but never enter basement level B. At first, she didn't question it. Every researcher valued their privacy, right? Maybe it contained sensitive experiments. Maybe it housed confidential patient trials. Whatever it was, she considered it outside her jurisdiction. But the more colleagues whispered about the mysterious lab, the more Emily's clinical curiosity grew. She dismissed the rumors, thought they were born of professional jealousy. She thought her focus on patients kept her above the fray. She thought her stellar reputation would protect her. But she never realized she was simply next on his list of potential threats. Marcus Whitley had never been a man who followed protocols. He administered treatments based on intuition rather than evidence, altered patient records to match his predictions, and ensured that no one, absolutely no one, had the authority to review his work. So when it came time to appoint Emily as chief of surgery, he didn't do it because of her impressive credentials. He did it to keep a potential rival where he could see her. The promotion wasn't presented as a professional courtesy. There were no congratulatory speeches about her surgical innovations, no genuine acknowledgement of her dedication. No, Marcus Whitley didn't praise, he calculated. He had been monitoring her success rates, watching as her reputation began to eclipse his own carefully fabricated image. She had been performing a complicated valve replacement that day, the kind of procedure that had once been considered impossible, but was now her specialty. The hours between the first incision and final suture had been focused, deliberate, the kind of surgical performance that drew observers from across departments. She had saved another life that most surgeons wouldn't have attempted to save, adding another success to a career built on taking risks that paid off. But the one risk she had never taken was questioning authority, particularly the authority of the man who controlled the hospital's resources, staffing, and future. She knew nothing about Marcus's background beyond what everyone else knew. Harvard, medical school, Johns Hopkins residency, groundbreaking HIV research in Africa. She never verified these claims. She never had reason to. His credentials seemed as solid as her own. So when he called her into his office and announced her promotion without asking if she wanted the position, without discussing the responsibilities it would entail, she hesitated only briefly before accepting. Chief of surgery at her age was unprecedented. It meant resources, autonomy, the ability to save more lives. The position came with a private office, additional staff, and a seat on the hospital board. A seat that would give her insight into decisions that affected patient care throughout the institution. The transition happened quickly. Marcus had arranged everything, expedited the paperwork, bypassed the usual committee votes. She was given the appearance of earned advancement, but the reality was she had been selected. The congratulations, the office, the title, every single marker of success had been bestowed not as recognition, but as strategy. Emily's first board meeting should have been the beginning of a new chapter in her career. Most newly appointed chiefs spent the first few months observing, learning the political landscape before making waves. But Emily wasn't like most doctors. When she noticed inconsistencies in the hospital's HIV treatment protocols, particularly discrepancies between Marcus's reported success rates and the actual patient outcomes, she didn't stay silent. "These numbers don't align with our patient records," she said, her voice steady as she pointed to his quarterly report. The boardroom fell silent, the kind of heavy silence that comes when an unspoken rule has been broken. Marcus's smile never faltered as he smoothly explained away the clerical error, promising to have his staff review the data. The other board members nodded, satisfied, but Emily felt something shift in the atmosphere, a subtle tension that hadn't been there before. 3 days after the meeting, Nurse Olivia Parker approached Emily outside the surgical wing. "Dr. Chen, could I speak with you privately?" Her voice was low, her eyes constantly scanning the hallway. Emily led her to her office, closed the door, and listened as Olivia shared concerns about irregularities she'd noticed in Dr. Whitley's documentation. "I've been here 15 years, Olivia said, "and something isn't right. Patient records are being altered after hours. Treatments are being documented that were never administered." Emily should have proceeded cautiously, should have gathered more evidence before taking action. But her commitment to patient safety overrode political considerations. She began her own quiet investigation, reviewing charts, cross-referencing lab results, creating a paper trail of inconsistencies. What she found wasn't just troubling, it was potentially criminal. It wasn't just data being manipulated. Patients enrolled in what they believed were breakthrough HIV treatment trials were receiving standard medications, while Marcus published papers claiming revolutionary results. The deception wasn't limited to research. It extended to his very identity. Phone calls to Harvard and Johns Hopkins confirmed what she was beginning to suspect. Neither institution had any record of a Marcus Whitley graduating from their medical programs. She took her findings to David Reynolds, the hospital administrator who had hired Marcus years earlier. She laid out the evidence methodically, professionally, expecting immediate action. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Instead, she received hesitation, excuses, and a warning. "Be very careful about making these kinds of accusations, Dr. Chen. Very careful indeed." What she didn't know was that David Reynolds had built his own career on Marcus's supposed breakthroughs. The hospital's reputation, its funding, its standing in the medical community, all were intricately tied to the fabricated success of Marcus Whitley's research. Exposing Marcus would mean exposing Reynolds' own negligence in verification, his own complicity in the deception. She left the meeting understanding one critical truth: she was alone in this fight. That night, she gathered her most damning evidence onto a flash drive: patient records, falsified research data, proof of credential fraud, and made a decision that would alter the course of not just her career, but her life. She would go to the Oregon Medical Board directly. The hospital corridors felt different that night as she walked toward the exit, the flash drive secure in her pocket. The usual busy energy had been replaced by an unsettling quiet, the kind of stillness that makes even familiar surroundings feel threatening. She was nearly at the main entrance when a security alert sounded, a code for a patient in distress in the surgical wing. Her responsibility. She redirected immediately, taking the elevator to the surgical floor, finding it mysteriously empty except for a single nurse who pointed her toward recovery room 7. "Possible post-op hemorrhage, Dr. Chen. They need you now." She rushed to the room, pushed open the door, and found it empty. Before she could turn around, she felt a sharp pain in her neck, the distinctive sting of an injection, and then darkness. She woke to the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, her vision blurry, her mind struggling to process her surroundings. She was strapped to an examination table, medical restraints securing her wrists and ankles. The room was sterile, clinical, filled with equipment she recognized but couldn't quite place in her disoriented state. And then she realized where she was. Basement level B. "You're finally awake." Marcus's voice came from behind her, calm and conversational, as if they were meeting for coffee instead of in his forbidden laboratory where she was restrained against her will. He moved into her field of vision, still wearing his white coat, still carrying himself with the same authoritative confidence. "I had hoped it wouldn't come to this, Emily. I truly did." She tried to speak, but her mouth was dry, her tongue heavy from whatever drug he had used to sedate her. He held up the flash drive, her evidence, her protection, between his fingers. "Looking for this?" he asked, dropping it into a container of clear liquid where it sizzled and dissolved. Such a shame. All that work, all that investigation. And for what? Her vision was clearing now, allowing her to see what surrounded her, not the groundbreaking research facility she had imagined, but something far more disturbing. The lab contained no revolutionary equipment, no evidence of the medical advancement he claimed to pioneer. Instead, she saw rows of blood samples, each labeled with names she recognized. Hospital staff, board members, colleagues. "You're wondering about all this, I imagine," he said, following her gaze to the samples. "Insurance, Emily. Just insurance." He picked up a vial, held it to the light. HIV is such a fascinating virus, don't you think? So much stigma, so much fear. Even now, with all our treatments, the diagnosis still carries weight. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "You're not researching treatments," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. "You're weaponizing the virus." He smiled, the same charming smile that had graced medical journal covers and hospital promotional materials. "I prefer to think of it as leveraging. You see, Emily, medicine isn't about healing, it's about power. Who has it, who doesn't, who decides who lives and who dies. I never needed a medical degree to understand that." He prepared a syringe, his movements practiced and precise despite his lack of formal training. "The beauty of my position is that I control the hospital's mandatory staff testing program. Blood samples from everyone every 6 months. Only now, for certain individuals, those who ask too many questions, who look too closely, the needle that draws blood first delivers something else." The weight of his words sank in as he approached her with the syringe. "8 of your colleagues have already received their special dose. Nurse Parker, Dr. Harrison from infectious disease, those especially curious lab technicians. They don't know yet, of course. They won't until their next test results come back positive. And by then, who would believe them if they claimed I was responsible? After all, I'm the renowned HIV researcher, and they're just unfortunate medical professionals who contracted the virus." She struggled against the restraints, the full horror of his scheme becoming clear. "People will investigate. They'll find out what you've done." "Will they?" he asked, positioning the needle against her arm. "Or will they see 8 medical professionals who work with blood daily, who have access to needles, who could have made mistakes? Hospitals are dangerous places, Emily. Accidents happen all the time." She felt the needle pierce her skin, felt the burning sensation as whatever he was injecting entered her bloodstream. She wanted to scream, but who would hear her in this soundproofed basement lab? Who would believe that the respected hospital director was systematically infecting his own staff? "Don't worry," he said, withdrawing the needle and applying pressure. "To the injection site with clinical detachment. You won't feel different immediately. That's the insidious beauty of it. By the time symptoms appear, if they do at all with modern antiretrovirals, the connection to this moment will be impossible to prove." He untied her restraints, but kept the door locked. "You have a choice now. You can try to expose me, knowing that no one will believe a newly HIV-positive doctor making wild accusations against her superior, especially when the evidence has been destroyed. Or you can keep quiet, continue your brilliant surgical career, and take the medications that will keep you alive. I'm giving you that chance, which is more than you were planning to give me." She rubbed her wrists where the restraints had left marks, her mind racing through options, scenarios, potential allies. "Why not just kill me?" she asked, the question direct, clinical, one professional to another. Dead surgeons raise questions, living ones with HIV who suddenly retract their accusations. They're just protecting their careers, their reputations. Besides, his smile turned cold, this way you live with the consequences of your curiosity. Death would be too simple. He unlocked the door, stepped aside. "You're free to go, Dr. Chen. I trust our conversation will remain confidential. After all, patient privacy is something we both respect, isn't it?" She walked out on unsteady legs, her mind already formulating a plan. Marcus Whitley had made a critical error in his calculation. He assumed she would be ruled by the same fear of exposure that controlled him. But Emily Chen hadn't spent her life breaking medical barriers by surrendering to fear. That night, she didn't go home. Instead, she went directly to the police station, where she requested Detective Michael Rodriguez, an officer known for handling sensitive cases involving medical institutions. For 3 hours, she detailed everything: the falsified credentials, the manipulated research, the infected blood samples. She had no flash drive, no physical evidence, but she had something Marcus hadn't anticipated. She had already sent copies of everything to her personal email account before creating the flash drive. "He's likely destroyed the original records," she explained, "but the digital trail still exists. Subpoena the hospital servers, and you'll find the original patient data before his alterations." Detective Rodriguez was skeptical but thorough. "These are serious accusations against a prominent figure, Dr. Chen. We'll need more than emails and suspicions." "Test my blood," she said, "and then compare it to samples taken from me during my hiring physical 4 months ago, which should still be in hospital storage. The same virus that appears in my blood now will match what's in his lab, not random community exposure." The investigation proceeded quietly at first. Search warrants were carefully worded to prevent tipping off the target. Hospital servers were mirrored, personnel files subpoenaed, credential verification conducted through official channels rather than phone calls that could be intercepted. What they found exceeded even Emily's accusations. Marcus Whitley didn't exist before 15 years ago. His entire identity, the prestigious education, the groundbreaking research, the international accolades, had been fabricated from scratch. The man leading Riverside Memorial Hospital had never attended medical school, had never completed a residency, had never taken the Hippocratic Oath. But the most damning evidence came from the lab itself. When the police finally raided basement level B, they found exactly what Emily had described: a collection of blood samples systematically contaminated with HIV, labeled with the names of staff members who had raised questions about Marcus's methods over the years. They found records of who had been infected and when, detailed notes on how the virus had been introduced during routine blood draws, and, most critically, they found Marcus's contingency plan. In a hidden compartment, beneath the floor tile, detectives discovered passports under different names, offshore account information, and a detailed exit strategy. Marcus Whitley had never expected to be caught, but he had prepared for the possibility with the same meticulous attention he brought to his deceptions. The raid on his private lab came swiftly in the pre-dawn hours, when the hospital was at its quietest. Police cruisers surrounded the building, their lights casting blue shadows across the institutional facade. Armed officers stormed the hospital entrance, their movements precise and coordinated. For the first time in his fabricated career, Marcus Whitley's authority meant nothing. They found him in his office, calmly deleting files, shredding documents, his movements unhurried even as the door burst open. He didn't resist, didn't attempt to run. He simply looked up from his computer, his expression composed, and said, "I assume Dr. Chen has been talking out of turn." The evidence was undeniable. His empire, built on falsified research and stolen authority, crumbled in an instant. Marcus Whitley, the man who had performed surgeries without training, prescribed treatments without knowledge, and infected innocent medical professionals with HIV, was finally exposed for what he truly was: a fraud, wearing a white coat. But even as they led him away in handcuffs, his expression remained impassive. He didn't beg, didn't plead, didn't apologize to the staff who had gathered to watch his fall. He simply looked straight ahead, as if even now he refused to acknowledge that his elaborate performance had reached its final curtain. The exposure of a fraud isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's methodical, the careful unraveling of lies that had been accepted as truth for too long. For Marcus Whitley, the unraveling was just beginning, and what investigators would discover in the coming weeks would shock even the most hardened medical professionals. After his arrest, Marcus Whitley's composure finally cracked during the interrogation. Detective Rodriguez laid out the evidence piece by piece: the falsified credentials, the contaminated blood samples, the detailed records of who had been infected and when. For hours, Marcus maintained his silence, his eyes fixed on some distant point, beyond the bare walls of the interrogation room. But when Rodriguez placed photographs of the 8 infected staff members on the table, something shifted in Marcus's expression. "Did you ever feel any remorse?" Rodriguez asked, his voice level despite the disgust churning inside him. "These people trusted you. They worked for you. They believed in you." Marcus's laugh was hollow, empty of any genuine amusement. "Trust is a commodity, detective. These people didn't trust me. They trusted a piece of paper on a wall, a title before my name. They trusted the idea of authority without ever questioning if I deserved it." His confession, when it finally came, revealed a pattern far more extensive than anyone had initially suspected. Marcus Whitley hadn't just deceived Riverside Memorial. He had moved from hospital to hospital across the country for over 15 years, assuming new identities, falsifying new credentials, abandoning each position just before suspicions could solidify into investigations. Portland was supposed to be different, he said, his voice taking on an almost wistful quality. "I'd refined my methods, established deeper background credentials. I could have stayed here indefinitely if Dr. Chen hadn't been so thorough." The most chilling revelation came when he described his selection process for the HIV infections. "It wasn't random," he explained with clinical detachment. "I chose people who were observant, who paid attention to details, the ones who might notice inconsistencies in patient charts or question treatment protocols. The best minds, really, the ones most likely to expose me." For the investigators, one question remained unanswered. Why medicine? Why not forge credentials in business, technology, or any other field with less scrutiny and fewer lives at stake? Marcus leaned forward, his restraints clinking against the metal table. "Medicine is the perfect deception," he said. "Doctors are trusted implicitly, their authority rarely questioned. Patients literally put their lives in your hands without verifying your credentials. What other profession offers that kind of power with so little actual oversight?" As the case moved toward trial, the full impact of Marcus's actions rippled through the medical community. The 8 infected staff members, now known in the press as the Riverside 8, faced not just a life-altering diagnosis, but the public exposure of their HIV status and the trauma of knowing it had been deliberately inflicted by someone they had respected. Olivia Parker, the nurse who had first approached Emily with concerns, struggled the most visibly. "I keep thinking about every interaction I had with him," she told reporters outside the courthouse. "Every time he complimented my work, every time he asked me to assist with a special case. Was he already planning it then? Was he watching me and thinking, she's getting too close?" Dr. James Harrison, head of infectious disease and another of the infected staff, approached his diagnosis with professional detachment that barely masked his rage. "The irony isn't lost on me," he said during his deposition. "I've dedicated my career to treating HIV patients, and now I'm one of them, because I questioned why our treatment protocols weren't matching published research." For Emily Chen, the weeks following Marcus's arrest were a blur of legal statements, medical treatments, and the impossible task of rebuilding trust among hospital staff. The virus flowing through her veins was a constant reminder of how thoroughly she had been deceived, how completely they had all been manipulated by a man with no medical training whatsoever. The hardest part isn't the diagnosis, she confided to Detective Rodriguez after a particularly grueling day of testimony. "The hardest part is knowing that our entire system failed, not just at Riverside, but at every hospital where he worked. Before, no one checked thoroughly enough, no one questioned convincingly enough. We all just accepted the facade because it was easier than admitting we might be wrong." As prosecutors built their case, they uncovered perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Marcus's deception. He had performed over 40 surgeries during his time at Riverside, despite having no surgical training beyond what he had gleaned from textbooks and observation. 3 patients had died on his table, deaths that had been attributed to complications, but now appeared to be the direct result of incompetence masked by confidence. The families of those patients joined the growing list of civil suits against both Marcus and the hospital. David Reynolds, the administrator who had hired him, resigned in disgrace when it became clear he had expedited the credential verification process based on Marcus's charming demeanor and impressive but fabricated references. The trial lasted 6 weeks, each day bringing new revelations about the extent of the deception. Marcus remained impassive throughout, occasionally whispering to his defense attorney, but never showing remorse, never acknowledging the people whose lives he had irreversibly altered. The prosecution's most powerful witness was Dr. Emily Chen. She took the stand with quiet dignity, her testimony clear and unembellished, despite the defense's attempts to portray her as a professional rival with a vendetta. When asked why she had continued investigating despite the risks, her answer silenced the courtroom. "Medicine is built on trust," she said simply. "Not just trust between doctor and patient, but trust between colleagues. We trust that when someone says they can perform a procedure, they've been trained to do it. We trust that when research is published, it's been ethically conducted. Without that trust, the entire system collapses. I couldn't walk away once I knew that trust had been violated." The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts, including 8 charges of attempted murder for the deliberate HIV infections, 3 charges of involuntary manslaughter for the surgical deaths, and dozens of counts of fraud, identity theft, and practicing medicine without a license. At his sentencing hearing, Marcus finally spoke directly to his victims. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the harm he had caused. Instead, he offered only a cold assessment of what he considered their collective failure. "I'm not the problem," he said, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "I'm just a symptom. The problem is a system so hierarchical, so dependent on appearances, that anyone who projects enough confidence can walk through its doors and command respect without earning it. I didn't create that system, I just exploited it, and if it wasn't me, it would have been someone else." The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, calling his crimes not just against the individuals directly harmed, but against the very foundation of medical trust. For the Riverside 8, the verdict brought closure, but not healing. They faced a lifetime of medication monitoring and the knowledge that their diagnosis came not from an accident or personal choice, but from one man's determination to silence their suspicions. 6 months after the sentencing, Emily Chen stood at a podium before the National Medical Conference that had once celebrated Marcus Whitley's fictional breakthroughs. The audience of physicians, administrators, and medical students fell silent. As she began to speak, "We failed," she said, her opening words hanging in the air. "Not just at Riverside, not just with Marcus Whitley, but as a profession that prioritized prestige over verification, that valued confidence over competence. The lesson we must take from this isn't just to check credentials more thoroughly, though certainly that matters. The lesson is that true medical authority doesn't come from titles or papers on walls or even from years of experience. It comes from a commitment to transparency, to peer review, to admitting what we don't know. She paused, looking out at the hundreds of faces watching her. Marcus Whitley thrived because we created a culture where questioning authority was seen as disrespectful, where hierarchies mattered more than evidence. If we want to prevent the next Marcus Whitley, we need to rebuild that culture from the ground up, one where questions are welcomed, where even the newest nurse can challenge the most senior doctor if patient safety is at stake. As she stepped away from the podium, the applause began slowly, then built to a standing ovation that acknowledged not just her courage in exposing the fraud, but the uncomfortable truth she had forced them all to confront. The medical establishment had created the perfect environment for deception through its own insular practices and resistance to scrutiny. For the Riverside 8, the future held both challenges and unexpected purpose. They formed a foundation dedicated to credential verification reform, creating systems that would make it virtually impossible for someone like Marcus to slip through again. They advocated for patients and medical professionals affected by HIV, working to reduce the stigma that Marcus had weaponized against them. And in hospital administration offices across the country, frames were removed from walls, credentials rechecked, histories verified. The legacy of Marcus Whitley would not be the lives he damaged or the trust he betrayed, but the systematic reforms that ensured no one could ever again wear the white coat without earning it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.